The morning mist clung to the valleys of Copper Valley like memories that refused to fade. Emma Walsh stood at her kitchen window, watching the sun struggle through the Montana clouds, painting the world in shades of amber and sorrow. Her wedding ring caught the light, a circle of gold that had become both comfort and burden in the 6 months since David's funeral. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of approaching hooves broke Emma's morning reverie. She watched as a figure emerged from the treeline, massive even at a distance, riding a horse that seemed too small beneath his frame. Jack Mitchell had been the talk of Copper Valley for the 3 days since his arrival, though talk was perhaps too generous a word. Whispers followed him through town like dust kicked up by nervous feet. Emma had heard the stories. A drifter from Texas, they said. A man who'd lost everything in the cattle wars down south and now wandered the territories looking for work that didn't exist and peace that couldn't be found. Some claimed he was running from the law. Others insisted he was the law, a federal marshal working undercover. The truth, Emma suspected, was probably simpler and sadder than either version. She watched him dismount near her fence line, his movements deliberate and careful despite his size. When he removed his hat, revealing dark hair touched with premature gray, she could see the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. This was a man acquainted with loss, and Emma recognized the signs because she wore them herself. The morning air carried the scent of pine and possibility as Jack approached her porch. Emma stepped outside, smoothing her black dress with hands that had grown too thin since David's passing. The dress had been her grandmother's, dyed black for mourning, and it hung on her frame like a tent housing grief. "Ma'am." Jack's voice rumbled like distant thunder, respectful and warm. "Name's Jack Mitchell. I heard in town you might have need of some help around your place." Emma studied his face, noting the kindness in his eyes that seemed at odds with the stories circulating about dangerous drifters and mysterious strangers. His hands were scarred but clean, his clothes worn but mended with care. This was not a man who'd given up on civilization, merely one who'd been disappointed by it. "Depends on what kind of help you're offering, Mr. Mitchell," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the flutter of nervousness in her chest. It had been months since she'd spoken to a man who wasn't trying to buy her land, offer unwanted advice, or express hollow condolences. Jack gestured toward the sagging fence posts and broken gate that had been on Emma's list of repairs since David's death. "Looks like you've got some carpentry needs. I'm handy with tools, and I work for fair wages. Nothing more complicated than that." The simplicity of his offer struck Emma as revolutionary. No one in Copper Valley had offered her straightforward help in months. Every conversation seemed layered with hidden meanings, unspoken expectations, or barely concealed pity. Here was a man offering to fix her fence because her fence needed fixing. "I should tell you," Emma said carefully, "that working for me might not make you popular in town. People have opinions about my situation." Jack's expression didn't change. "I've never been much concerned with popularity, ma'am. A fence is either straight or it isn't. Work is either done well or it isn't. Everything else is just noise." Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a loosening in her chest that might have been the beginning of hope. The previous man who offered to help, Mr. Garrett from the bank, suggested I might consider selling the ranch. He said, "A woman alone couldn't possibly manage a spread this size." "Mr. Garrett ever run cattle?" Jack asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "I don't believe so." "Then I'd say his opinion on ranch management carries about as much weight as mine would on banking." Jack settled his hat back on his head. "You know your land, ma'am. You know what it can do and what it needs. That's worth more than all the advice from town experts who've never spent a dawn checking cattle or a midnight helping with a difficult birth." Emma felt tears threaten for the first time in weeks, not from sadness, but from the simple relief of being spoken to as a capable person rather than a problem to be solved. "Mr. Mitchell, I believe we might be able to work something out." As Jack headed toward his horse to retrieve his tools, Emma noticed movement on the ridge overlooking her property. 3 riders sat silhouetted against the morning sky, too distant to identify but close enough to be watching. She'd noticed similar observations over the past few weeks, always at the edges of her vision, always just far enough away to maintain deniability. The riders were gone by the time Jack returned with his tool satchel, but Emma filed the sighting away with the others. David had taught her to notice patterns, to read the signs that preceded trouble on the range. The pattern emerging around her property was becoming impossible to ignore. Jack worked with the efficiency of a man who understood both wood and time. Emma watched from her kitchen window as he assessed each damaged section, making mental calculations before beginning repairs. His movements were economical, purposeful, never wasting motion or effort. This was not a man who'd learned carpentry as a hobby. By mid-morning, the curious had begun to gather. Margaret Thompson found reasons to walk past Emma's property twice, her eyes fixed on the large stranger working in Emma's yard. Robert Kane, the blacksmith, rode by on an errand that seemed to involve studying Jack's repair techniques from the road. Even Father O'Brien made an appearance, ostensibly checking on Emma's spiritual welfare, but clearly interested in the developments at her ranch. Emma brought Jack water at noon, setting the glass on the porch rail with a plate of cornbread she'd baked that morning. It was the first time she'd cooked for someone other than herself since David's funeral, and the simple act of hospitality felt both foreign and familiar. "Seems like I'm providing entertainment for the whole valley," Jack observed, nodding toward the road where another curious passerby had slowed to observe his work. "They're not used to strangers," Emma replied, "especially strangers who don't immediately ask about my late husband or offer advice about my future." Jack tested the strength of a repaired fence post with his shoulder, checking that it would hold against the pressure of cattle or weather. "What would you like me to know? About your husband?" The question caught Emma off guard. In 6 months of condolences and conversations, no one had asked what she wanted to share rather than demanding details or offering opinions about David's death. "He was a good man," Emma said simply. "He loved this land and understood it. He taught me to see cattle not as property, but as individuals with personalities and needs. He believed in treating animals with respect and neighbors with fairness." "Sounds like he was fortunate to have you as a partner." Emma felt warmth spread through her chest at the word partner. Everyone else spoke of David as if she'd been his dependent rather than his equal, as if she'd lost her purpose along with her husband. "We were fortunate to have each other," Emma corrected gently, "even if it wasn't for long enough." Jack nodded, understanding passing between them that required no further explanation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Loss was a language they both spoke fluently, and the conversation moved naturally to other topics. Emma found herself talking about her plans for the ranch, her concerns about the approaching winter, her ideas for improving the grazing rotation that David had begun implementing. As the afternoon wore on, Emma realized she was enjoying herself for the first time since David's death. Not happy, exactly, but engaged with the present moment rather than lost in memories or anxiety about the future. Jack listened to her ideas, with the attention of someone who understood both ranching and the value of her insights. The sound of multiple horses approaching broke their conversation. Emma's stomach tightened as she recognized the lead rider. Victor Harrington owned the largest spread in Copper Valley, a man whose influence extended into every aspect of the community's life. His arrival at her ranch was never a social call. Victor dismounted with the confidence of a man accustomed to being welcomed whether his presence was desired or not. His clothes were expensive, his horse perfectly groomed, his manner that of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. Behind him rode Frank Dalton, his foreman, and 2 other men Emma didn't recognize. "Emma, my dear." Victor's voice carried the practiced warmth of a politician greeting voters. "I hope you're well. I see you've found some help with your maintenance needs." Emma noticed how Victor's eyes lingered on Jack, assessing him with the calculation of a man who viewed everyone as either an asset or a threat. Jack continued working, but Emma could see the subtle shift in his posture that indicated he was paying attention to every word and movement. "Mr. Harrington," Emma replied with the minimal politeness social convention required. "What brings you to my property today?" Concern for a neighbor, naturally. Victor's smile was practiced but didn't reach his eyes. "Winter's coming early this year, and managing a spread this size alone will be challenging. I wanted to renew my offer to purchase your land at a fair price. You could start fresh somewhere more suitable for a woman in your position." Emma had heard variations of this offer monthly since David's funeral. The price Victor mentioned was never quite fair, and his definition of suitable always seemed to involve her moving far away from Copper Valley. I appreciate your concern, Emma said carefully, but I'm managing well enough. Victor's gaze shifted to Jack, who was now openly listening to the conversation while continuing his work. I don't believe we've been introduced, friend. Victor Harrington, owner of the Double H Ranch. Jack straightened to his full height, which put him at eye level with Victor despite the mounted man's advantage. Jack Mitchell. I do odd jobs around the valley. Is that so? Victor's tone suggested he found Jack's presence more interesting than his introduction warranted. What brings you to Copper Valley, Mr. Mitchell? Work brings me most places. Jack replied evenly. Seems like there's always something needs fixing. Emma watched the exchange with growing tension. Victor's questions carried undertones she didn't like, and Jack's responses were carefully neutral in a way that suggested he recognized the undercurrents as well. Well, Victor said after a pause that lasted longer than comfort allowed, I hope you find our community welcoming. We're always interested in newcomers who understand how things work around here. The words sounded like a warning disguised as welcome. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I appreciate the sentiment, Jack said. I've found most places work best when folks mind their own business and treat their neighbors with respect. Victor's smile faltered slightly. Of course, though sometimes what appears to be respect can actually be misguided interference. Emma stepped forward, her patience with veiled threats reaching its limit. Mr. Harrington, Mr. Mitchell is helping me with repairs I need completed. I hardly see how that constitutes interference with anything. Naturally, Emma. I simply want to ensure you're not being taken advantage of by someone who might not have your best interests at heart. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire. Emma felt her temper rise at the suggestion that she couldn't judge character or make decisions about her own property. I'm perfectly capable of determining what's in my best interests, Emma said, her voice sharp with controlled anger. Just as I'm capable of managing my ranch and making my own decisions about my future. Victor's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Of course you are, dear. I simply worry about you out here alone with winter approaching. Accidents can happen so easily on isolated ranches. The word accidents carried weight that made Emma's stomach clench. David's death had been ruled an accident, a fall from his horse while checking fence lines. But Emma had never quite believed the official explanation. David was too experienced a rider, too careful with his horse, too familiar with every inch of their property to simply fall and break his neck on familiar ground. Jack's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Mrs. Walsh won't be alone. I'll be staying in the area through winter, helping with whatever needs doing. Emma felt surprise and gratitude in equal measure. Jack hadn't mentioned staying beyond the immediate repairs, but his declaration created a buffer against Victor's implied threats that she desperately needed. Victor's mask of concern slipped completely. That's very generous of you, Mr. Mitchell. I hope you've considered all the responsibilities that come with such a commitment. I have, Jack replied simply. I take my commitment seriously. The stare that passed between the two men lasted several heartbeats too long. Emma could feel the weight of unspoken communications, threats and promises exchanged in glances and posture rather than words. Well, Victor said finally, gathering his reins with sharp movements that made his horse sidestep nervously. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other, Mr. Mitchell. Copper Valley is a small community. Everyone gets to know everyone eventually. As Victor and his men rode away, Emma realized her hands were shaking. She'd been living with low-level anxiety for months, but the encounter had crystallized her fears into something concrete and immediate. Thank you, she said quietly to Jack. For what you said about staying. Jack nodded, his eyes still fixed on the departing riders. I meant it. That man's not done with you, and I don't think his intentions are neighborly. Emma felt a mix of relief and fear at having her concerns validated. David never trusted him, said Victor had too much influence and not enough conscience to use it well. Your husband was a good judge of character. They stood in comfortable silence as the dust from Victor's departure settled. Emma realized that for the first time since David's death, she didn't feel completely alone in facing whatever challenges lay ahead. The feeling was both comforting and terrifying, because it reminded her how much she had to lose if something happened to Jack. As evening approached, Jack gathered his tools with the same methodical care he'd shown in using them. The fence repairs were complete, and Emma's property looked more cared for than it had in months. But more importantly, Emma felt more like herself than she had since David's funeral. "Mr. Mitchell," Emma said as Jack prepared to leave, "I want you to know that your offer to stay through winter means more to me than I can properly express. But I also want you to understand what you might be agreeing to. Victor Harrington is a powerful man with a long reach. Standing with me might make you enemies you don't deserve." Jack settled his hat on his head and looked at Emma with eyes that held depths of understanding she was only beginning to explore. "Mrs. Walsh, I've been making enemies I don't deserve for most of my adult life. The difference is, this time I'd be standing with someone worth standing beside." The simple honesty of his statement hit Emma like a physical blow. She felt tears threaten again, but this time they carried hope alongside the sorrow that had become her constant companion. "I'll see you tomorrow then?" Emma asked, hardly daring to believe in the possibility of tomorrow bringing anything other than loneliness and anxiety. "Yes, ma'am. Bright and early. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." As Jack rode away into the gathering darkness, Emma stood on her porch and felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Not happiness, not yet, but the possibility of happiness. The chance that her future might hold more than just survival and memories. In the distance she could see lights beginning to flicker in the windows of Copper Valley. Her neighbors were settling in for the evening, safe in their homes and their certainties about how the world worked. Emma envied them their security, but she no longer envied them their blindness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new confrontations, new tests of her resolve and Jack's commitment. Victor Harrington was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully, and Emma's refusal to sell her ranch combined with Jack's protection would escalate their conflict beyond polite threats and veiled warnings. But tonight, for the first time in months, Emma Walsh felt like a woman with options rather than a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to build something lasting on. The mountain air carried the promise of winter and the whisper of change. Emma wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and went inside to prepare supper for one, already looking forward to the day when she might cook for two again. Change was coming to Copper Valley, whether its residents were ready or not. And Emma Walsh intended to be part of shaping that change rather than simply enduring it. The gossip mill of Copper Valley ground to life before dawn had fully broken over the mountain peaks. Margaret Thompson's sharp eyes had cataloged every detail of the previous day's encounter at Emma's ranch, and her tongue was already busy distributing the information to anyone willing to listen. By the time the general store opened, half the town knew that the mysterious stranger had declared his intention to winter at the widow's property. At Murphy's boarding house, where Jack had taken a room, the breakfast conversation revolved around speculation about his true intentions. The other residents, mostly traveling salesmen and seasonal workers, exchanged theories over coffee and eggs about what a man of his size and apparent capabilities was really doing in their quiet valley. Mrs. Murphy herself, a stout woman with opinions as firm as her grip on the coffee pot, had no patience for gossip but plenty of curiosity about her newest tenant. Jack ate his breakfast in silence, listening to the swirl of conversation around him without contributing to it. He'd learned long ago that people revealed more about themselves when they thought you weren't paying attention. The morning air held the crisp bite of early autumn as Jack made his way through town toward Emma's ranch. Copper Valley was stirring to life around him, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, children hurrying toward the schoolhouse, workers heading to the various businesses that kept the community functioning. It was the kind of place that could be peaceful if not for the undercurrents of fear and control that seemed to flow beneath the surface like an underground river. At the blacksmith's forge, Robert Kane looked up from his work as Jack passed. The big man's presence was hard to ignore, and Kane found himself comparing Jack's easy confidence with the nervous energy that seemed to infect most strangers when they realized how much influence Victor Harrington wielded in the valley. This newcomer either didn't understand the local power structure or didn't care about it, and Kane wasn't sure which possibility worried him more. Emma was already outside when Jack arrived, feeding chickens from a metal pail with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing farm chores since childhood. She looked up as he approached, and Jack noticed that the haunted expression she'd worn yesterday had been replaced by something that might have been anticipation. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," Emma called, scattering the last handful of grain for the eager birds. I hope Mrs. Murphy's breakfast was adequate. More than adequate, Jack replied, dismounting near the barn. Though I suspect the conversation was more interesting than the food. Emma's smile held knowing sadness. I imagine my name came up once or twice, more than once, along with various theories about my character and intentions. Jack began unloading tools from his saddlebags, most of them creative, if not particularly flattering. Emma felt a stab of guilt at the reminder that Jack was facing scrutiny and suspicion because of his association with her. Mr. Mitchell, I want you to know that if the situation becomes uncomfortable for you in town, I would understand if you decided to move on. I wouldn't want your reputation to suffer because of me. Jack paused in his unpacking to look at her directly. Miss Walsh, I've never had much of a reputation to protect, and I've found that the people worth knowing don't judge a man by the company he keeps. They judge him by how he treats that company. The simple wisdom of his statement hit Emma with unexpected force. In the months since David's death, she'd grown accustomed to being treated as either a problem to be solved or an opportunity to be exploited. Jack's willingness to be judged by how he treated her, rather than demanding she prove herself worthy of his respect, was revolutionary in its basic decency. What needs doing today? Jack asked, effectively closing the discussion about his reputation while opening possibilities for meaningful work. Emma gestured toward the barn, where several boards had come loose from the winter storms. The barn needs attention before the weather turns, and the cattle need to be moved to the winter pasture soon. It's a two-person job, but I've been trying to figure out how to manage it alone. Jack studied the barn's construction with the eye of someone who understood both carpentry and the demands of mountain weather. We'll get the barn weatherproofed first. Then we can talk about moving cattle. You know your herd better than anyone. I know how to follow directions and handle ornery animals. The casual assumption that they would work together as partners, rather than employer and employee, was another small revolution in Emma's recent experience. David had always treated her as an equal partner in their ranching operation. But since his death, every man who'd offered help had done so with the clear expectation that he would make decisions and she would follow them. As they worked together repairing the barn, Emma found herself studying Jack's methods and philosophy. He approached each task with careful assessment before action, never rushing but never wasting time either. When she offered suggestions about local weather patterns, or the specific challenges of their mountain environment, he listened with the attention of someone who understood that expertise came from experience rather than just formal education. You mentioned yesterday that you'd done carpentry before, Emma said as they worked to replace a section of damaged siding. But you seem to know ranching as well. Jack measured twice before making his cut, a habit that spoke to both precision and resource conservation. I've done a lot of things. Sometimes circumstances require learning new skills quickly. Emma sensed there were stories behind that simple statement, chapters of Jack's life that had taught him adaptability and self-reliance. She respected his privacy too much to pry, but she found herself curious about the experiences that had shaped a man who could be both gentle and formidable as circumstances required. The morning's work progressed with the easy rhythm of two people who understood both the job at hand and each other's working style. Emma had forgotten how satisfying it could be to accomplish tasks with a competent partner. To have someone who could hold the other end of a board, or provide a steadying hand when precision was required. Around mid-morning, they were interrupted by the arrival of Helen Davis, the school teacher. Helen was one of the few women in Copper Valley who had ever shown Emma genuine kindness, perhaps because her own position as an unmarried woman in a conservative community gave her insight into the challenges of being different from social expectations. Emma, I hope I'm not interrupting, Helen called as she approached the barn. Her eyes took in Jack's imposing figure with curiosity rather than fear. I wanted to check on you after hearing about yesterday's excitement. Emma wiped her hands on her work apron and stepped forward to greet her friend. What kind of excitement are people talking about? Helen's expression grew carefully neutral. Well, there seem to be various versions of events circulating. Some involve mysterious strangers with dubious intentions. Others focus on Victor Harrington's concern for your welfare. I thought I'd come hear the actual story from you. Emma appreciated Helen's direct approach. In a community where truth often became distorted by multiple retellings, having someone ask for facts rather than accepting gossip was refreshing. Mr. Harrington stopped by to renew his offer to purchase my ranch. Emma said simply. Mr. Mitchell helped me with some necessary repairs. I'm not sure where the excitement comes from in either of those activities. Helen's eyes moved to Jack, who had continued working but was clearly listening to their conversation. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Helen Davis. I teach at the local school. Jack touched his hat respectfully. Pleased to meet you, Miss Davis. Emma speaks highly of you. Helen seemed pleasantly surprised by both his courtesy and the fact that Emma had mentioned her to him. In a small community, such details mattered as indicators of trust and friendship. I hope you're finding Copper Valley welcoming, Helen said, though her tone suggested she suspected he might not be. I'm finding it interesting, Jack replied diplomatically. Every community has its own personality. Takes time to understand the local customs. Helen laughed, a sound that held more understanding than humor. That's a tactful way of saying you've noticed our community has some complicated dynamics. Emma felt grateful for Helen's presence and perspective. Having another person acknowledge that Copper Valley's social dynamics were challenging made her feel less isolated in her own struggles with the community's treatment of her. Miss Davis, Jack said, setting down his hammer. You seem like someone who knows this area well. What should someone new understand about surviving a mountain winter here? The question was practical, but Emma heard the underlying request for information about more than just weather patterns. Helen seemed to understand the subtext as well. Winters here can be harsh and isolating, Helen said thoughtfully. The smart approach is to prepare thoroughly and build relationships with reliable neighbors. The dangerous approach is to underestimate either the weather or the local politics. Jack nodded as if she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. And what would you say about someone who found themselves caught between those local politics? Helen glanced at Emma before answering. I'd say that person should be very careful about who they trust, but not so careful that they refuse all offers of genuine friendship. Sometimes the people who seem safest are actually the most dangerous, and sometimes the people who seem dangerous are actually the safest. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Emma felt her shoulders tense automatically at the sound, a response she'd developed since David's death when unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. This time, however, the visitor was Dr. William Foster, riding alone and at a pace that suggested urgency rather than social calling. Emma's tension increased for different reasons. Dr. Foster only made house calls when someone was seriously ill or injured. Dr. Foster, Emma called as he dismounted. Is everything all right? Is someone hurt? Dr. Foster was a man in his 40s, with the gentle manner of someone who'd spent years delivering both good and bad news to worried families. His expression was troubled as he approached their small group. Emma, Miss Davis, sir. He nodded to each of them in turn. Emma, I wanted to speak with you privately about a matter of some importance. Emma felt her heart rate increase. Of course. Is it about someone in town? Dr. Foster glanced at Jack and Helen, clearly unsure how much he should say in front of them. Emma made a quick decision that surprised even herself. Dr. Foster, anything you need to discuss with me can be said in front of my friends. Mr. Mitchell and Miss Davis both have my complete trust. The words felt significant as she spoke them. In the months since David's death, Emma had been cautious about trusting anyone completely. But something about both Jack's steady presence and Helen's consistent kindness had earned her confidence in ways that surprised her. Dr. Foster nodded slowly. Very well, Emma, I've been doing some thinking about David's death, and I have some concerns I think you should be aware of. Emma felt the world shift slightly around her. What kind of concerns? The injuries David sustained in his supposed fall never quite made sense to me medically. I've been reviewing my notes, and there are inconsistencies that have been bothering me for months. Jack stepped closer, his attention fully focused on the doctor's words. What kind of inconsistencies? Dr. Foster pulled out a small notebook from his medical bag.
David's neck was broken, but the fracture pattern was wrong for a fall from horseback. The angle was too precise, too clean. It looked more like the result of deliberate force than accidental trauma. Emma felt her legs weaken and was grateful when Jack stepped close enough to provide support if she needed it. "Are you saying someone killed David?" "I'm saying the medical evidence suggests that possibility should have been investigated more thoroughly than it was." Dr. Foster's voice was careful but firm. "The problem is, Sheriff Brady was very quick to rule it an accident. He discouraged questions and rushed the burial." Helen spoke into the silence that followed. "Sheriff Brady, who works very closely with Victor Harrington." Dr. Foster nodded grimly. "The same Sheriff Brady who's been handling several recent deaths in the valley, all ruled accidental, all involving people who'd had disagreements with certain powerful interests." Emma felt pieces of a puzzle she hadn't realized existed beginning to fall into place. "You think David was murdered because he opposed something Victor wanted?" "I think David's opposition to Victor's expansion plans made him inconvenient," Dr. Foster corrected. "Whether that inconvenience led to murder is something that would need proper investigation to determine." Jack's voice was quiet but carried an edge that made everyone pay attention. "What kind of expansion plans?" Emma answered before Dr. Foster could respond. "Victor wants to buy up all the smaller ranches in the valley. He's made offers to everyone, but David and I were among the few who refused to sell. David said Victor's plans would destroy the traditional ranching community that made this valley special. David was also asking questions about some of Victor's business practices." Dr. Foster added. He'd noticed cattle with questionable brands being moved through the valley at odd hours. He was starting to suspect Victor might be involved in rustling operations. Helen's expression grew troubled. "That would explain why Victor's been so insistent about buying out the remaining independent ranchers. He needs control of the entire valley to operate without scrutiny." Emma felt a mix of grief and anger as the implications became clear. David died because he was honest and observant. David died because he posed a threat to Victor's plans. Jack corrected gently. "The question now is what we do with this information." Dr. Foster closed his notebook with hands that trembled slightly. "I want to see justice done for David and the others, but I also want to stay alive long enough to see it happen. Victor Harrington has a long reach and few scruples about using it." Emma looked at each of her companions, seeing her own determination reflected in their faces. "Then we need to be smarter than he is. We need to gather proof that can't be ignored or suppressed." Jack nodded slowly. "And we need to be very careful about who else we trust with what we're learning." As if summoned by their conversation about trust and danger, the sound of multiple horses approaching made them all tense. Emma counted at least 4 riders, moving at a deliberate pace that suggested purpose rather than casual travel. Victor Harrington appeared through the trees, accompanied by Sheriff Brady and 2 men Emma didn't recognize. The sheriff's presence added an official weight to their visit that made Emma's stomach clench with anxiety. "Well, well," Victor called as they approached. "Quite a gathering you have here, Emma. Dr. Foster, Miss Davis. I hope everything is well." Doc Foster stepped forward with professional composure. "Just making a social call, Victor. Checking on Emma's health after the stress of recent changes." Victor's smile was practiced but didn't reach his eyes. "How thoughtful. And Sheriff Brady wanted to meet our new resident, Mr. Mitchell. We like to keep track of strangers in our peaceful valley." Sheriff Brady was a heavy-set man whose uniform always seemed slightly too small for his frame. His eyes held the flat look of someone who'd stopped asking questions about justice years ago, and focused instead on maintaining order as defined by those with power. "Mr. Mitchell," Sheriff Brady's voice carried official authority. "I understand you're planning to spend the winter in our area. Mind if I ask what brings you to Copper Valley?" Jack met the sheriff's gaze steadily. "Work brings me most places, Sheriff. Mrs. Walsh has projects that need completing before winter." "What kind of work did you do before coming here?" Sheriff Brady pressed. "Various kinds. I go where the jobs are and do what needs doing." Jack's answers were factual but unrevealing. Victor leaned forward in his saddle, his interest clearly piqued by Jack's evasive responses. That's quite vague, Mr. Mitchell. Surely you have some particular skill or profession. Emma stepped forward, her patience with the interrogation reaching its limit. Gentleman, Mr. Mitchell is working for me on my property. I hardly see why his employment history is a matter of public concern. Sheriff Brady's expression hardened. When strangers arrive in my jurisdiction and start involving themselves in local affairs, it becomes my concern. What local affairs would those be? Helen asked with deceptive innocence. Barn repair and fence mending. Victor's practiced smile faltered slightly at Helen's intervention. As the school teacher, Helen commanded a certain respect in the community that made challenging her more complicated than intimidating Emma. Of course, the work itself isn't the issue, Victor said smoothly. We simply want to ensure that Emma isn't being taken advantage of by someone with less than honorable intentions. Jack's voice remained calm, but Emma noticed the subtle shift in his posture that suggested controlled tension. I appreciate your concern for Mrs. Walsh's welfare. She strikes me as quite capable of judging character and making her own decisions. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly at the implication that his concern might be unwelcome or unnecessary. Sheriff Brady decided to reassert his authority. Mr. Mitchell, I'll need to see some identification and ask you to come to the office to fill out some paperwork. Standard procedure for new residents. Emma felt alarm at the suggestion. She'd heard of people being detained on paperwork technicalities and then facing mysterious accidents while in custody. Sheriff, Dr. Foster interjected. Surely that can wait until a more convenient time. We were just discussing some medical concerns that require Emma's attention. Victor's interest sharpened. Medical concerns? I hope everything is all right, Emma. Emma felt trapped between truth and safety. Admitting to health problems might make her seem vulnerable, but Dr. Foster's intervention had provided a plausible reason to end the unwelcome visit. Just routine matters, Victor. Nothing serious. Emma's voice was steadier than she felt. Sheriff Brady wasn't ready to abandon his demands. The paperwork won't take long, Mr. Mitchell. If you're planning to stay in the area, it's best to get these formalities handled promptly. Jack nodded slowly. I understand the importance of following proper procedures, Sheriff. When would be convenient for you? How about tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock. Emma felt panic at the thought of Jack being alone with Sheriff Brady in the jail. Mr. Mitchell will be helping me move cattle tomorrow morning. Perhaps later in the week would work better. Victor's smile became predatory. Moving cattle is quite an undertaking for just two people. Perhaps you'd welcome some assistance from more experienced hands. The offer sounded like a threat disguised as neighborly help. Emma understood that accepting would mean having Victor's men on her property, watching her activities and looking for opportunities to cause trouble. Thank you, but we have the situation well in hand. Emma replied firmly. Victor studied her face with the calculation of a poker player trying to read an opponent's cards. Of course you do, but if you change your mind, you know where to find me. As the unwelcome visitors prepared to leave, Sheriff Brady made one final attempt to establish control. Mr. Mitchell, I'll expect to see you at my office by the end of the week. Don't make me come looking for you. Jack touched his hat respectfully. Understood, Sheriff. After the riders disappeared into the trees, the four friends stood in silence for several moments, each processing the implications of what had just occurred. Dr. Foster was the first to speak. That felt very much like a warning. Helen nodded.
Agreement. Victor doesn't like having his authority questioned, and Sheriff Brady follows Victor's lead on most matters. Emma felt the weight of responsibility for drawing her friends into a dangerous situation. I'm sorry you're all being pulled into this because of me. Jack's response was immediate and firm. Mrs. Walsh, you're not pulling anyone into anything. We're all choosing to stand with you because it's the right thing to do. Dr. Foster adjusted his medical bag and prepared to mount his horse. Jack's right, Emma. This isn't about you personally. It's about whether we'll let fear control our community, or whether we'll stand up for justice and decency. Helen gathered her skirts and prepared to leave as well. Emma, you're not alone in this, but we all need to be very careful about our next steps. As her friends departed, Emma found herself alone with Jack for the first time since the morning's revelations. The weight of learning that David might have been murdered, combined with the obvious threats from Victor and Sheriff Brady, left her feeling overwhelmed and frightened. Mr. Mitchell, Emma said quietly, I need you to understand what you might be getting yourself into by staying here. These aren't idle threats or small-town politics. If Dr. Foster is right about David's death, then Victor Harrington is willing to kill to get what he wants. Jack finished packing his tools with the same methodical care he showed in everything else. Mrs. Walsh, I've faced dangerous men before. The difference is, this time I'm fighting for something worth protecting. Emma felt tears threaten at the simple honesty of his statement. I don't want to lose anyone else I care about. The admission surprised them both. Emma hadn't intended to reveal how quickly she'd come to depend on Jack's presence, but the words hung between them with unmistakable truth. Jack turned to face her fully, his expression serious but gentle. Emma, I can't promise that nothing will happen to me. Life doesn't come with guarantees, but I can promise that I won't leave you to face this alone, and I won't let fear make my decisions for me. Emma nodded, understanding that this was as much commitment as anyone could honestly offer. Then we'll face whatever comes together. As evening approached, Emma prepared supper while Jack tended to his horse. The routine domestic activities felt surreal against the backdrop of murder and threats, but they also provided a sense of normalcy that both of them needed. During their meal, they discussed practical plans for the cattle drive and barn completion, but underneath the ordinary conversation lay the shared knowledge that their lives had become far more complicated and dangerous than either had anticipated. When Jack prepared to leave for town, Emma felt the familiar anxiety that had plagued her evenings since David's death. But tonight the anxiety was tempered by determination and the knowledge that she wasn't facing the darkness alone. Tomorrow, Jack said as he mounted his horse, we'll move those cattle and show Victor Harrington that some things can't be intimidated or bought. Emma watched him ride toward town, noting how he sat his horse with the confidence of a man comfortable in his own strength. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and probably new threats. But tonight, for the second evening in a row, Emma Walsh felt like a woman with allies and options rather than a victim waiting for the next blow to fall. The mountain air carried the scent of approaching weather and the promise of change. Emma wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and went inside to plan for a future that suddenly seemed possible again, even if it wouldn't be easy to achieve. The dawn sky painted Copper Valley in shades of rose and gold as Emma prepared for the cattle drive that would test both her resolve and Jack's commitment. She'd been awake since before sunrise, checking supplies and reviewing the route to the winter pasture that she and David had used for 3 seasons. The familiar ritual of preparation helped calm her nerves, though she couldn't shake the feeling that today would bring more than just the movement of livestock. Jack arrived as promised, leading a sturdy pack horse loaded with supplies for what might become an extended stay in the high country. His presence filled Emma with a confidence she hadn't felt since David's death, but it also reminded her of how much she had come to depend on his steady strength in just a few days. Weather looks favorable for the drive, Jack observed, studying the clear sky with the eye of someone who understood mountain conditions. How long does it usually take to move your herd to winter quarters? Emma finished loading her saddlebags with extra rope and medical supplies for the cattle. David and I could usually manage it in a long day if everything went smoothly. Alone, I was expecting it to take 2 days, maybe 3. Jack nodded, understanding the mathematical reality of ranch work. With 2 experienced hands, we should be able to do it properly in 1 day. You know the cattle and the route. I know how to keep animals moving without spooking them. They rode toward the main pasture where Emma's cattle had spent the summer, a natural meadow surrounded by stands of aspen and pine that provided both shelter and feed. The herd was smaller than what Victor ran on his spread, but Emma took pride in the quality of her animals and the care they received. There, Emma pointed toward a cluster of cattle grazing near the creek. 23 head, mostly heifers and young steers. The old bull Augustus likes to wander, but he's the key to keeping the others together. Jack studied the herd with professional interest. Good-looking animals. Someone's been taking proper care of them.
Emma felt a flush of pride at the compliment. David taught me that healthy cattle start with good grass and clean water. We've never pushed our land beyond what it can support. As they began the careful process of gathering the scattered cattle, Emma was impressed by Jack's instinctive understanding of bovine psychology. He positioned himself to encourage movement without creating panic, used his horse to guide rather than chase, and seemed to anticipate which animals might try to break away from the group. "You've done this before," Emma observed as they successfully turned a stubborn heifer back toward the main herd. "Some," Jack replied, his attention focused on a young steer that seemed inclined to explore rather than follow. "Every region has different techniques, but cattle are cattle. They want to stay together, they want to move at their own pace, and they don't like surprises." The morning progressed smoothly as they guided the herd along the familiar trail toward the winter pasture. Emma found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the work, enjoying the partnership with someone who understood both the job and her capabilities. It had been months since she'd felt like a competent rancher rather than a struggling widow. Around mid-morning, their peaceful progress was interrupted by the appearance of 3 riders coming from the direction of Victor's ranch. Emma recognized Frank Dalton, Victor's foreman, accompanied by 2 men she'd seen but never met. Their approach was casual but deliberate, the kind of encounter that was probably not accidental. "Mrs. Walsh," Dalton called as they approached. "Quite an operation you have here, moving the herd to winter pasture." Emma kept her position near the lead cattle, not wanting to let the herd scatter while dealing with unwelcome visitors. "Mr. Dalton, yes, we're moving them to higher ground before the weather changes." Dalton's eyes fixed on Jack with obvious assessment. "This must be the fellow everyone's talking about. Frank Dalton, foreman at the Double H." Jack touched his hat politely but didn't move from his position flanking the herd. "Jack Mitchell, pleased to meet you. That's quite a group of cattle you're moving," Dalton continued, his tone conversational but his eyes calculating. "Mr. Harrington was mentioning that some of our stock has been wandering. Haven't seen any strays mixed in with your herd, have you?" Emma felt her stomach tighten at the implication. Accusations of cattle theft were serious business in ranching country, and false accusations could be used to justify almost any retaliation. "These are all our animals," Emma said firmly. "I know every head personally." One of Dalton's companions, a lean man with cold eyes, spoke for the first time. "Easy enough to say, but brands can be changed. Might be worth taking a closer look." Jack's voice carried a warning that was polite but unmistakable. "I'm sure Mrs. Walsh's records are in perfect order. She strikes me as someone who takes proper care of her business." Dalton seemed to recognize the challenge in Jack's tone. "No offense intended, Mitchell. Just looking out for Mr. Harrington's interests. You understand how it is." Emma understood exactly how it was. This was intimidation disguised as concern, an attempt to create trouble where none existed, and establish grounds for future harassment. "Mr. Dalton," Emma said with controlled calm, "you're welcome to examine any of my cattle if you have specific concerns. But I would appreciate it if you would state those concerns clearly rather than making vague implications." Dalton's expression shifted slightly at Emma's direct challenge. He'd probably expected her to be flustered or defensive rather than demanding specificity. "Well now, Mrs. Walsh, I wouldn't want to delay your drive with a detailed inspection. Maybe we could arrange something more convenient. Say, when you're not out here in the middle of nowhere with just 1 man for protection." The threat was subtle but clear. Emma felt anger rise in her chest at the suggestion that she was vulnerable and needed to be more accommodating to avoid trouble. Jack's horse moved slightly closer to Emma's, a positioning that looked casual but put him between her and Dalton's men. "Mrs. Walsh seems well protected to me, but if you have legitimate business concerns, I'm sure they could be addressed through proper channels." Dalton laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Proper channels. That's an interesting phrase from someone who hasn't been around long enough to understand how things work in this valley." Emma had heard enough veiled threats for one morning. "Gentlemen, we have work to finish and weather to beat. If you have specific accusations to make, please make them. Otherwise, I'd appreciate it if you'd let us get on with our business." The lean man with cold eyes leaned forward in his saddle. "That's quite an attitude for someone in such a precarious position." Jack's response was immediate and final. I'd say Mrs. Walsh's position is exactly as secure as she chooses to make it. The stare that passed between Jack and Dalton's companion lasted several heartbeats longer than comfort allowed. Emma could see the calculation in both men's eyes, each assessing the other's capabilities and resolve. Dalton finally broke the tension by gathering his reins. Well, we should let you folks get back to your cattle drive. Mrs. Walsh, you take care of yourself out here. Mountain country can be dangerous for people who aren't careful. As Victor's men rode away, Emma realized her hands were trembling with suppressed anger and anxiety. The encounter had been brief, but loaded with implications that made her stomach clench with worry. They were looking for an excuse to cause trouble, Jack observed, watching the riders disappear into the trees. Emma nodded, her mouth tight with frustration. They're building a case for something. False accusations, trumped-up charges, anything they can use to justify taking action against me. Jack guided his horse closer to Emma's, his presence offering comfort and solidarity. Then we make sure they don't find any legitimate excuses. We do everything by the book, document everything, and don't give them openings to exploit. The remainder of the cattle drive proceeded without incident. But the encounter with Dalton's men had changed the atmosphere. Emma found herself scanning the treeline for watchers, listening for the sound of approaching horses, wondering if every shadow might conceal someone with hostile intentions. Jack seemed to sense her increased anxiety and positioned himself to provide both practical help with the cattle and psychological reassurance that she wasn't facing potential threats alone. His quiet competence and steady presence helped Emma regain her focus on the work at hand. The winter pasture was a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside, surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided shelter from the worst weather while offering access to protected grazing. Emma and David had chosen this location carefully, and seeing her cattle settling into the familiar space brought her a measure of peace, despite the morning's tension. Good choice of location, Jack commented as they watched the herd spread out to explore their new surroundings. Plenty of grass, good water, natural windbreaks. Your husband had an eye for country. Emma felt the familiar pang of loss at the mention of David, but it was tempered now by gratitude for the partnership that had made this day possible. David always said the land would take care of the cattle if we took care of the land. They spent the afternoon checking the salt licks and mineral supplements Emma had placed throughout the pasture, ensuring the herd had everything needed for the winter months ahead. The work was satisfying in the way that good ranch management always was, but Emma found herself thinking about the larger implications of what they'd accomplished. Jack, Emma said, as they prepared for the ride back to her ranch, what happened today with Dalton and his men? It's not going to end there. Jack secured his gear with the methodical care that characterized all his actions. No, it's not. They were testing our resolve and looking for weaknesses. When they don't find either, they'll try different tactics. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What kind of tactics? Hard to say without knowing more about their operation. But men like Victor Harrington usually escalate gradually. Harassment, false accusations, economic pressure, then physical intimidation if the subtle approaches don't work. The clinical way Jack analyzed the threat made Emma realize he'd faced similar situations before. You sound like you have experience with this kind of thing. Jack mounted his horse and waited for Emma to do the same before answering. I've seen what happens when powerful men decide they want something and don't care who gets hurt in the process. The tactics are usually similar, regardless of the specific circumstances. As they rode back toward Emma's ranch, the afternoon light, painting the valley in warm golds and deep shadows, Emma found herself studying Jack's profile and wondering about the experiences that had given him such insight into the psychology of corruption and intimidation. Jack, Emma said carefully, I know it's not my business, but I get the sense that you've been involved in law enforcement at some point. Jack was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of memories he rarely shared. I was a territorial marshal for several years. Worked cases involving corrupt officials, land fraud, organized criminal enterprises. I've seen how men like Victor operate, and what happens to people who get in their way. Emma felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Jack's calm confidence in dangerous situations, his understanding of evidence and investigation, his instinctive grasp of legal procedures all made sense now. "What made you stop?" Emma asked gently. Jack's expression grew distant. "I got tired of arriving too late to save the people I was supposed to protect. Started thinking there might be more value in preventing problems than cleaning up after them." Emma understood the exhaustion and disillusionment behind that statement. "Is that what you're doing here? Preventing problems?" Jack looked at her directly, his eyes holding depths of determination she was still learning to read. "I'm trying to make sure that this time, the good people win before the bad ones destroy everything worth protecting." They rode the rest of the way home in companionable silence, each lost in thoughts about the challenges ahead and the partnership that had developed between them. Emma found herself marveling at how much her world had changed in just a few days, from isolation and fear to alliance and hope. As they approached Emma's ranch, the familiar sight of her cabin and outbuildings filled her with a sense of homecoming she hadn't experienced since David's death. Having Jack beside her, sharing the work and the risks, made the place feel like home again, rather than just a collection of buildings where she happened to live. "Emma," Jack said as they unsaddled their horses, "there's something we need to discuss about the meeting with Sheriff Brady tomorrow." Emma felt her stomach tighten at the reminder. "You're not actually going to go, are you?" Jack considered his answer carefully. "If I don't show up, it gives them an excuse to come looking for me with official authority behind them. That puts you at risk by association." Emma understood the logic but hated the implications. "And if you do go, you might not come back." Jack secured his horse in the barn with the same attention to detail he showed in everything else. "Emma, I need you to understand something. I've been in situations like this before, and I know how to handle myself. But more importantly, we can't let fear make our decisions for us. The moment we start avoiding confrontation, we give them control." Emma knew he was right, but the thought of Jack walking into what might be a trap made her chest tight with anxiety. What if something goes wrong? Jack turned to face her fully, his expression serious but reassuring. "Then you know enough about Victor's operation to continue investigating without me. Dr. Foster has the medical evidence. Helen understands the local politics, and you have all the documentation about your husband's concerns." The practical nature of his response both comforted and frightened Emma. Jack was planning for the possibility that he might not survive tomorrow's meeting, but he was also ensuring that his sacrifice wouldn't be meaningless. "I don't want to continue anything without you," Emma said quietly, the admission surprising her with its honesty. Jack's expression softened. "Emma, you're stronger than you think you are. You've been investigating David's death and fighting Victor's pressure for months. My job is to make sure you don't have to do it alone, not to do it for you." That evening, as they shared supper in Emma's kitchen, the conversation ranged from practical matters like winter preparations to more personal topics like their respective backgrounds and beliefs. Emma found herself opening up to Jack in ways that surprised her, sharing thoughts and fears she hadn't voiced since David's death. "Jack," Emma said as they finished their meal, "I want you to know that having you here, having your support and partnership, has meant more to me than I can properly express. For the first time since David died, I feel like myself again." Jack reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the simple gesture conveying understanding and affection that words couldn't capture. "Emma, you never stop being yourself. You just needed someone to remind you of your own strength." As Jack prepared to leave for his meeting with Sheriff Brady the next morning, Emma stood on her porch watching him saddle his horse with the same methodical care he brought to every task. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and Emma could see her breath in small puffs as she spoke. "Promise me you'll be careful," Emma said, hating how helpless the words sounded. Jack checked his cinch one final time before mounting. I promise I'll be smart about it. Sometimes that's the best kind of careful there is. Emma watched him ride toward town, noting how he sat his horse with the confidence of a man, comfortable with danger but respectful of its potential consequences. As he disappeared into the trees, Emma felt the familiar anxiety of being alone, but it was tempered by the knowledge that she was no longer facing her challenges without allies. The morning stretched endlessly as Emma tried to occupy herself with routine chores while listening for the sound of returning hooves. Every noise made her heart race. Every shadow made her wonder if it might be a messenger bringing bad news about Jack's fate. Around noon, Dr. Foster arrived at a gallop, his usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious agitation. Emma met him at the gate, her stomach clenching with fear at his urgency. "Emma," Dr. Foster called as he dismounted. "I have news about Jack's meeting with Sheriff Brady. It's not what we expected." Emma felt her knees weaken. "What happened? Is he hurt?" Dr. Foster shook his head quickly. "He's fine, but the meeting revealed more than any of us anticipated. Jack isn't just a former territorial marshal, Emma. He's still working for the federal government, and he's been investigating Victor's operation for months." Emma stared at Dr. Foster, trying to process information that changed everything she thought she understood about Jack's presence in Copper Valley. "He's been investigating Victor. Why didn't he tell me?" Dr. Foster looked uncomfortable with the revelation he was sharing. According to what Sheriff Brady let slip during their meeting, Jack's been gathering evidence about a larger criminal network that includes Victor's operation. "Your husband's death was what brought federal attention to this valley." Emma felt a mix of relief that Jack was safe and confusion about the implications of his deception. "So everything he told me about being a drifter looking for work was a cover story to explain his presence while he investigated," Dr. Foster finished. "But Emma, from what I could gather, his feelings about you and his commitment to protecting you are completely genuine." Emma sank onto her porch steps, overwhelmed by the revelations and their implications. "What happens now?" Dr. Foster sat beside her, his expression thoughtful. "Now we wait for Jack to return and explain what he's really been doing here." "But Emma, this might actually be good news. If the federal government is involved, Victor's influence with local officials won't protect him." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching horses made them both look toward the road. Jack appeared through the trees, riding at a normal pace that suggested his meeting had concluded without immediate danger. Emma rose to meet him, her mind churning with questions about truth and deception, about the real reasons for his presence in her life, and the authenticity of the connection that had developed between them. Jack dismounted and approached them both, his expression serious but not troubled. "Foster, Emma, I see word travels fast in small towns." Emma studied Jack's face, looking for signs of the man she thought she'd come to know behind the revelation of his true identity. "Is it true? Are you really a federal marshal investigating Victor?" Jack removed his hat and ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of weariness rather than nervousness. "Yes and no. I was a territorial marshal, and I am investigating Victor's operation. But I'm not currently employed by any government agency." Dr. Foster looked confused. "Then why did Sheriff Brady seem to think you had federal authority?" Jack's smile held irony rather than humor. "Because I let him think what he wanted to think. Sheriff Brady is more afraid of federal investigators than he is loyal to Victor. When I mentioned certain legal authorities and federal statutes, he drew his own conclusions." Emma felt relief and anger in equal measure. "So you've been lying to me about who you are." Jack met her gaze directly, his expression serious but not defensive. "I've been using a cover story to explain my presence here." "Yes, but Emma, everything I've told you about my feelings for you, my commitment to protecting you, my desire to see justice done for..."
Nature of Victor's murderous enterprise. The doctor's courage in speaking truth despite personal risk had earned him the respect of the community, and an appointment as the valley's chief medical examiner, ensuring that future suspicious deaths would receive proper investigation. Helen Davis had been offered a position with the Territorial Education Department in recognition of her role in uncovering the evidence that brought down Victor's criminal network. However, she chose to remain in Copper Valley as the head of an expanded school system that would serve the growing community of families attracted by the valley's new reputation for honest governance and economic opportunity. The transformation extended beyond individual lives to the very character of the community itself. With Victor's intimidation removed, small ranchers and farmers began cooperating in ways that strengthened everyone's prospects. Cooperative cattle drives, shared equipment purchases, and mutual aid during difficult weather created bonds of genuine neighborliness that replaced the fear and suspicion that had previously defined relationships in the valley. Emma found herself at the center of many of these positive changes, her ranch becoming a gathering place for planning community improvements and resolving disputes through discussion rather than violence. Her experience surviving Victor's persecution, combined with her education and natural intelligence, made her a respected voice in local decision-making. The woman who had once been shunned as a harbinger of misfortune was now sought out for her wisdom and leadership. Jack's role in the community had evolved as well. His law enforcement background and demonstrated integrity led to his appointment as the valley's new sheriff, a position he accepted with the understanding that his authority would be used to serve justice rather than private interests. His gentle strength and fair judgment made him popular with honest citizens while serving as a deterrent to anyone contemplating criminal activity. The morning's wood splitting completed, Jack approached the kitchen door with an armload of split logs and the easy smile that had become as familiar to Emma as her own reflection. Their relationship had deepened through shared trials into something that honored both Emma's memories of David and the unique partnership she'd discovered with Jack. "Coffee's ready," Emma called as Jack stamped snow from his boots before entering the warm kitchen. The domestic routine had developed naturally over the months they'd spent rebuilding both the ranch and their lives. Jack set the firewood in the box beside the stove and accepted the steaming cup Emma offered him. "Marshal Peterson sent word that the territorial governor wants to meet with you about the land reform commission they're establishing." Emma felt a familiar mixture of pride and trepidation at the recognition of her expertise in land management and community development. "What kind of commission?" Jack settled into the chair across from Emma's at the kitchen table, a piece of furniture that had become their informal office for planning both ranch operations and community activities. "They want to establish guidelines for preventing the kind of land consolidation schemes that Victor used to gain control over entire regions. Your experience with his tactics and your understanding of small ranch economics make you valuable to their planning." Emma considered the implications of such involvement. It would mean traveling to the territorial capital probably for several weeks at a time. Jack's expression reflected understanding rather than concern. "Emma, this is exactly the kind of work David would have supported. Using your experience to protect other communities from what this valley suffered." The mention of David no longer brought the sharp pain of fresh grief but rather a warm recognition of values and purposes that connected her past with her present. David always said that surviving hardship created an obligation to help others avoid similar suffering. Jack reached across the table to cover Emma's hand with his own, a gesture that had become their silent communication of support and affection. "What matters most is what you want to do, Emma. We've built a good life here, but if you feel called to larger service, I'll support whatever decision you make." Emma felt the security of being with someone who valued her judgment and autonomy rather than trying to control or limit her choices. "What about the ranch? What about your duties as sheriff?" Jack's smile held the confidence of a man who'd learned to solve problems through cooperation rather than force. "The ranch will be here when we return, and Marshal Peterson has offered to provide temporary law enforcement coverage if needed." "Emma, opportunities like this don't come often. The territorial government is finally serious about reform, and they need people with real experience to make it work." Emma rose from the table and moved to the window, looking out over the valley that had become so much more than just her home. The landscape held layers of meaning now, from the memories of David's dreams for the land to the trials she'd endured with Jack to build something lasting and good. "Jack," Emma said quietly, "when you first came here you promised you'd make me forget my first husband.
But what you've actually done is help me understand that honoring David's memory doesn't require limiting my future. Jack joined Emma at the window, his presence offering the steady support that had anchored her through transformation and growth. Emma, love isn't a finite resource that gets used up. What you shared with David was real and important. What we're building together is also real and important. They don't diminish each other. Emma leaned against Jack's solid warmth, feeling the truth of his words settle into her heart. Then let's accept the appointment. Let's use what we've learned here to help other communities find their way to justice and peace. Jack wrapped his arms around Emma, holding her with the gentle strength that had first drawn her trust and had since become the foundation of their partnership. Together, Emma turned in Jack's embrace to face him directly, seeing in his eyes the same commitment to shared purpose that had defined their relationship from its beginning. Always together. That's what partnerships mean. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their moment of planning and reflection. Through the kitchen window they could see a small group of riders approaching the ranch, their pace and posture suggesting official business rather than social visiting. Jack stepped onto the porch to greet the visitors, his hand resting casually near his gun as old habits of caution asserted themselves. Emma joined him, recognizing Marshal Peterson among the riders along with two men in expensive suits who carried themselves with the authority of territorial officials. Sheriff Mitchell, Mrs. Walsh. Marshal Peterson called as the group dismounted. I hope we're not interrupting important business. Emma stepped forward with the confidence she'd developed through months of dealing with officials and community leaders. Not at all, Marshal Peterson. Please come inside where it's warm. The men followed Emma and Jack into the kitchen, where the atmosphere of domestic comfort seemed to put everyone at ease. Emma poured coffee for the visitors while Jack arranged chairs around the table that had hosted so many important conversations. Marshal Peterson gestured toward his companions. Mrs. Walsh. Sheriff Mitchell, I'd like you to meet Governor Richardson's Chief of Staff, Mr. Daniel Morrison, and the Territorial Attorney General, Mr. Samuel Adams. They've come to discuss the Land Reform Commission personally. Mr. Morrison was a tall, scholarly man whose careful manner suggested someone accustomed to complex negotiations. Mrs. Walsh. Your reputation has reached the territorial capital. Governor Richardson believes your insights could be invaluable in preventing other communities from experiencing what Copper Valley endured. Emma felt both honored and curious about the scope of what they were proposing. What exactly would this commission be empowered to do? Mr. Adams, a compact man with the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent years prosecuting difficult cases, answered her question. The commission would investigate land acquisition patterns throughout the territory, identify potential criminal enterprises similar to Harrington's operation, and recommend legal reforms to prevent such consolidation schemes. Jack leaned forward with interest. What kind of authority would the commission have? Mr. Morrison opened a leather portfolio and withdrew several documents. Full territorial authority to subpoena records, compel testimony, and coordinate with federal marshals when criminal activity is suspected. This wouldn't be a ceremonial position, Mrs. Walsh. You'd be investigating and potentially exposing powerful interests throughout the territory. Emma understood that they were offering her significant responsibility and equally significant danger. How many other communities are facing situations similar to what we experienced here? Mr. Adams exchanged glances with his colleagues before answering. Our preliminary investigation suggests that Harrington's methods were not unique. We've identified at least 6 other regions where similar patterns of mysterious deaths and forced land sales have occurred. Emma felt anger rise in her chest at the thought of other widows enduring what she'd survived, other communities living under the shadow of fear and corruption. How long would this appointment last? Mr. Morrison consulted his notes. The initial authorization is for 2 years, with the possibility of extension if needed. The position includes substantial compensation and federal protection for commission members and their families. Jack spoke the question Emma was thinking. What kind of federal protection? Marshal Peterson answered with the authority of someone who understood the realities of frontier law enforcement. Deputy marshal status for immediate family members, secure transportation, and priority response to any threats against commission members. Mrs. Walsh. If you accept this position, you'll have the full backing of territorial and federal authority. Emma looked around the kitchen that had become the center of her rebuilt life, thinking about the security and happiness she'd found in Copper Valley, balanced against the opportunity to prevent other communities from suffering as hers had. "Gentlemen," Emma said finally, "I appreciate the confidence you're showing in my abilities. Could you give me a few days to discuss this with my partner and make arrangements for our ranch operations?" Mr. Morrison smiled with obvious relief. "Of course, Mrs. Walsh. This is a significant commitment, and you should take whatever time you need to consider all the implications." Mr. Adams added his own reassurance. "Mrs. Walsh, I want you to understand that Governor Richardson specifically requested your involvement because of how you handled the situation here. You didn't just survive Harrington's persecution, you systematically built the case that brought him to justice. That's exactly the kind of intelligence and persistence we need." After the officials departed, Emma and Jack spent the afternoon discussing the practical and personal implications of accepting the commission appointment. They walked the boundaries of Emma's ranch, checking cattle and reviewing the improvements they'd made together, while talking through the challenges and opportunities of the proposed work. "Emma," Jack said as they paused at the fence line overlooking the valley, "I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'm with you completely. This ranch will always be here as our home. But if you feel called to larger service, then that's what we should do." Emma studied the landscape that held so many memories and meanings, from David's dreams of peaceful ranching to the trials that had tested her strength and the partnerships that had sustained her through transformation. "Jack, when Victor threatened me during those final days, I realized that I'd rather die fighting for something meaningful than live safely while others suffered what I'd endured. This commission offers a chance to make that fight systematic and effective." Jack nodded with understanding born of his own experience fighting corruption and injustice. "Then we accept the appointment and do whatever it takes to protect other communities from predators like Harrington." Emma felt the rightness of the decision settling into her bones like the warmth of a well-built fire. "Together?" Jack smiled with the quiet confidence that had anchored their partnership from its beginning. "Always together, Emma. That's what we do." That evening, as they sat by the fire planning the details of accepting the territorial appointment, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her from devastating grief to purposeful partnership. The woman who had once been blamed for her community's troubles was now being asked to help heal similar wounds throughout the territory. The irony wasn't lost on her that the giant cowboy who'd promised to make her forget her first husband had instead helped her transform her memories of David into a foundation for serving others. Love, she'd learned, wasn't about forgetting the past, but about building futures worthy of the best from that past. Jack worked at the kitchen table, writing letters to arrange temporary coverage for his sheriff duties, while Emma drafted her acceptance of the commission appointment. The domestic scene felt surreal against the backdrop of the important work they were planning. But it also felt perfectly natural for two people who'd learned to face challenges as partners. "Emma," Jack said as he sealed his letters, "there's something I want to ask you before we begin this new chapter." Emma looked up from her own correspondence, noting the unusual nervousness in Jack's manner. "What is it?" Jack rose from the table and moved to the fireplace, where he stood for a moment gathering his thoughts before turning back to face Emma. "Emma, we've been through trials together that most couples never face. We've built something strong and good here, and now we're about to embark on work that will test us in new ways." Emma felt her heart rate increase as she sensed the significance of whatever Jack was preparing to say. "Jack, you're making me nervous with all this preamble." Jack smiled and reached into his vest pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. "Emma Walsh, you're the strongest, most intelligent, most courageous woman I've ever known. You've taught me that love isn't about protecting someone from challenges but about facing those challenges together." Emma felt tears beginning to blur her vision as Jack approached her chair and knelt beside it. Jack opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a modest but beautiful diamond. "Emma, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you let me spend the rest of my life earning the right to be your partner in everything we do?" Emma looked into Jack's eyes, seeing reflected there all the trials they'd survived and all the hopes they shared for their future together. "Jack Mitchell, when you first came to this valley, you promised you'd make me forget my first husband. But what you've actually done is help me understand that love multiplies rather than replaces itself." Jack's expression grew uncertain. "Is that a yes?" Emma laughed through her tears as she extended her left hand toward him. "That's absolutely a yes, Jack. Yes to marrying you, yes to the commission work, yes to building a life together that honors the past while embracing the future." Jack slipped the ring onto Emma's finger with hands that trembled slightly with emotion. "Mrs. Emma Mitchell has a nice sound to it." Emma admired the ring sparkling in the firelight, thinking about all the changes it represented. "It does indeed. And I think David would approve of the man I've chosen to share my future with." Jack drew Emma into his arms, holding her with the gentle strength that had first earned her trust and had since become the foundation of their love. "Emma, I promise to spend every day earning the right to be your husband and your partner in whatever challenges we face." Emma tilted her face up to meet Jack's kiss, tasting the salt of happy tears and the sweetness of a future filled with purpose and partnership. "And I promise to face those challenges with the courage you've helped me discover and the love you've taught me to trust again." The fire crackled in the hearth as Emma and Jack planned their wedding and their future work with the Territorial Commission. They would marry in the spring, after the commission work was well underway, in a ceremony that would celebrate not just their love but the community's transformation from fear to hope. Helen Davis would serve as Emma's maid of honor, while Dr. Foster would stand with Jack as his best man. The wedding would take place in the same community hall where the truth about Victor's crimes had first been revealed, transforming a place of confrontation into a space of celebration and new beginnings. As winter deepened over Copper Valley, Emma and Jack spent their evenings preparing for the commission work that would take them throughout the territory. They studied maps, reviewed legal documents, and corresponded with other communities that might benefit from their expertise and protection. The ranch continued to operate smoothly under Emma's careful management and Jack's strong back, while their neighbors provided the kind of mutual support that characterized the valley's new spirit of cooperation. Robert Kane, the blacksmith, had volunteered to oversee their property during extended absences, while Helen coordinated with other local women to ensure Emma's cattle received proper care. Dr. Foster stopped by regularly, ostensibly to check on their health, but actually to discuss the medical aspects of their commission work. His experience detecting and documenting suspicious deaths would prove invaluable in identifying communities where criminal enterprises might be operating under the cover of accidental fatalities. On a particularly clear January morning, as Emma and Jack reviewed commission documents while breakfast cooked on the stove, a telegram arrived that would define their first major investigation. Marshal Peterson's message was brief but urgent: suspicious deaths in Silver Creek similar to Harrington pattern. Commission requested immediately. Federal marshals standing by. Emma looked up from the telegram to meet Jack's eyes, seeing reflected there the same mixture of anticipation and determination she felt herself. "Our first case." Jack nodded, already mentally shifting into the investigative mindset that had served him well during his law enforcement career. "Silver Creek is 3 days' ride south. Remote valley, small community, perfect target for someone operating Harrington's methods." Emma rose from the table and began gathering the supplies they'd prepared for exactly this moment. "Then we'd better get started. Somewhere in Silver Creek, there are people who need what we learned here." Jack secured the commission documents in his saddlebags while Emma packed provisions for extended travel. The routine was familiar from their law enforcement planning, but this time they were acting with official authority and clear purpose rather than desperate improvisation. As they prepared to leave Copper Valley for their first commission investigation, Emma paused on her porch to look out over the land that had become so much more than just her home. The valley spread before her in winter beauty, peaceful and prosperous under honest governance, a testament to what communities could become when good people found the courage to stand against corruption. "Ready?" Jack asked, leading their horses from the barn. Emma mounted her horse and settled into the saddle with the confidence of someone who'd learned to face challenges rather than avoid them. "Ready, partner. Let's go bring some justice to Silver Creek." As they rode south toward their first commission assignment, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her from devastating loss to purposeful partnership. The giant cowboy who'd promised to make her forget her first husband had instead helped her transform grief into strength, fear into courage, and isolation into the kind of partnership that could change entire communities. Behind them, Copper Valley continued its transformation under the governance of honest officials and the cooperation of neighbors who'd learned to trust each other. Ahead of them lay the work of extending that transformation to other communities suffering under the weight of corruption and fear. Emma Walsh Mitchell rode toward her future with confidence, purpose, and the unshakable knowledge that she and Jack could face whatever challenges awaited them as long as they faced them together. Love had indeed proven stronger than loss, and justice had proven more powerful than fear. The mountain air carried the promise of spring and the whisper of hope extending far beyond the borders of their valley. Emma and Jack were ready to answer that call, carrying the lessons of Copper Valley to wherever they might be needed in the service of justice and the protection of innocent people. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.
David, all of that is absolutely true. Emma studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. What she saw instead was the same steady honesty that had drawn her to trust him in the first place, complicated now by the reality of his hidden agenda, but not invalidated by it. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Emma asked quietly. Jack stepped closer, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the cost of secrets. Because the less you knew about my real purpose here, the safer you were. And because I wanted you to trust me for who I am, not for what authority I might represent. Dr. Foster cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should discuss what this means for our investigation and our safety going forward. Jack nodded, his attention shifting to practical matters. It means we have more resources than we thought, but it also means Victor will be more desperate and dangerous as he realizes he's under serious scrutiny. Emma felt the pieces of her world rearranging themselves around this new information. Jack was still the man who'd helped her with repairs, partnered with her on the cattle drive, and offered her protection and respect. But he was also someone with experience and authority she hadn't known about. Someone whose presence in her life had purposes beyond the personal connection that had developed between them. Jack, Emma said carefully, I need to understand something. Did you seek me out because of David's death, or was meeting me just a coincidence? Jack's answer was immediate and honest. I came to Copper Valley because David's death was suspicious and suggested larger criminal activity. I sought you out because you were David's widow and might have information that could help my investigation. But Emma, everything that's developed between us since then has nothing to do with the investigation, and everything to do with who you are as a person. Emma felt some of her tension ease at his directness. And now? Jack looked at both Emma and Dr. Foster, his expression determined. Now we finish what we started. We gather enough evidence to bring down Victor's operation, we get justice for David and the others, and we make sure this valley is safe for decent people to live in. As the three of them stood in Emma's yard, discussing plans and possibilities, Emma realized that while Jack's revelation had changed the context of their relationship, it hadn't changed the fundamental trust and affection that had grown between them. If anything, knowing that he was competent to handle the dangers they faced made her feel more secure about the challenges ahead. The afternoon sun was painting the valley in warm light as they made plans for gathering evidence and coordinating with Dr. Foster's medical documentation. Emma found herself thinking about the future with a combination of hope and determination that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. Whatever Jack's original reasons for coming to Copper Valley, Emma was grateful for his presence and his partnership. The man who had promised to make her forget her first husband was instead helping her honor David's memory by ensuring that his death would not go unavenged, and his concerns about the valley's future would not be ignored. The autumn morning brought news that would change everything in Copper Valley. Helen Davis arrived at Emma's ranch before sunrise, her usually composed demeanor shattered by urgency and fear. She dismounted her horse with shaking hands, clutching a leather satchel against her chest like a shield against the world's cruelties. Emma, Jack, Helen called, her voice carrying across the yard with desperate intensity. I found something, hidden in the schoolhouse, tucked behind loose boards where no one would think to look.
Emma emerged from the chicken coop where she'd been gathering eggs for breakfast, immediately alert to the panic in her friend's voice. Jack appeared from the barn, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun he wore concealed beneath his coat. In the days since his true identity had been revealed, he'd grown more cautious about potential threats, more protective of Emma's safety. "What did you find?" Emma asked, setting down her basket and moving toward Helen with concern etched across her features. Helen opened the satchel with trembling fingers, revealing a collection of documents, letters, and what appeared to be financial records. Letters from Victor to someone named Crawford in Denver. Instructions about eliminating problems, payments for services rendered, and Emma, there are records of payments made after David's death. Jack took the documents with the careful attention of someone trained in evidence handling. His expression grew increasingly grim as he examined each piece of paper, his law enforcement experience allowing him to recognize the significance of what Helen had discovered. "This is a correspondence file," Jack said quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Victor's been running a systematic operation for years. Land acquisition through intimidation, murder when necessary, and payoffs to officials who might ask inconvenient questions." Emma felt her legs weaken as the full scope of Victor's criminal enterprise became clear. "How many people has he killed?" Jack continued reading, his jaw tightening with each document. "According to these records, at least 8 deaths in the past 3 years. All ruled accidental, all involving people who owned property Victor wanted or who asked too many questions about his business practices." Helen sank onto Emma's porch steps, overwhelmed by the implications of her discovery. "I only found them because one of my students knocked over a lamp near the back wall. When I went to check for damage, I noticed the boards were loose. I thought it might be a place where children had been hiding things, but instead I found this entire collection." Emma studied the documents over Jack's shoulder, her heart racing as she recognized some of the names mentioned in Victor's correspondence. "That's William Morrison, the tax assessor who died last spring. And there's James Fletcher, the bank examiner who supposedly had a heart attack." Jack's expression was that of a man who'd seen too much corruption and violence in his career. "This is enough evidence to hang Victor Harrington and half his organization. But first we need to get these documents to someone with the authority to act on them." Helen looked between Emma and Jack with growing anxiety. "There's something else. I think Victor knows the documents are missing. When I left the schoolhouse this morning, I saw 2 of his men riding toward town from the direction of the school. They might have been watching the building." Emma felt cold fear wash over her as she realized the implications. If Victor knows Helen found the evidence, then she's in danger. "We're all in danger." Jack was already moving toward his horse, his mind shifting into the tactical thinking that had kept him alive through years of dangerous work. "We need to get these documents to the territorial capital immediately. There's a federal judge there who's been investigating territorial corruption." Helen stood up with sudden determination. "I'm coming with you. Victor's men have probably already searched my quarters at the schoolhouse. I can't stay here safely anyway." Emma felt panic rise in her chest at the thought of being separated from both Jack and Helen when Victor's organization was closing in around them. "What about me? I can't just wait here while you're gone." Jack paused in his preparations, torn between the need to move quickly and his commitment to Emma's safety. "Emma, someone needs to stay and maintain normal appearances. If we all disappear at once, Victor will know we have evidence and he'll run before we can bring him to justice." Emma understood the logic but hated the reality of being left alone when danger was escalating around them. "How long will you be gone?" Jack secured the documents in his saddlebags with the care of someone who understood their life or death importance. 3 days there, 1 day for the judge to review the evidence and issue warrants, 3 days back. Maybe a week total if everything goes smoothly. Helen mounted her horse with the determination of someone who'd made an irrevocable decision. "Emma, you could come to my sister's house in Millerville. It would be safer than staying here alone." Emma considered the option but ultimately shook her head. "If I abandon my ranch now, Victor wins even if you succeed in bringing him to justice. This is my home, and I won't be driven from it by fear." Jack rode closer to Emma, his expression reflecting both admiration for her courage and concern for her safety. "Emma, promise me you'll be careful. Don't take any unnecessary risks, and if Victor's men come around, don't try to handle them alone." Emma reached up to touch Jack's hand, feeling the colluse's strength of fingers that had learned to fight for justice in an unjust world. Promise me you'll come back. I've lost one good man to Victor's ambitions, and I can't bear the thought of losing another. Jack leaned down from his saddle to press a gentle kiss to Emma's forehead, a gesture that spoke of affection deeper than mere partnership or alliance. I'll come back, Emma. I have too much to live for now to take foolish chances. As Jack and Helen rode toward the territorial capital carrying evidence that could bring down Victor's criminal empire, Emma stood in her yard watching them disappear into the morning mist. The silence that followed their departure felt different from the loneliness she'd experienced after David's death. This was not the emptiness of loss, but the tension of waiting, the anxiety of knowing that everything she cared about hung in the balance of the next few days. Emma threw herself into ranch work with desperate intensity, using physical labor to quiet the anxious voices in her mind. She repaired fence lines that didn't truly need attention, reorganized the barn for the third time that month, and cleaned every surface in her cabin until it gleamed. The activity helped pass time but couldn't eliminate her worry about Jack and Helen's safety or her own vulnerable position. On the second day of their absence, Emma's worst fears began materializing. Victor Harrington arrived at her ranch with a larger group than usual. 6 men whose hard faces and ready weapons suggested they weren't planning a social visit. Emma watched them approach from her kitchen window, her heart hammering against her ribs as she recognized the change in their demeanor. Victor dismounted with the confident swagger of a man who believed he held all the advantages. Emma, my dear, I hope you're well. I understand you've been having some exciting visitors lately. Emma stepped onto her porch with outward calm that belied her inner terror. Mr. Harrington, what brings you to my property today? Victor's smile held none of the practiced warmth of their previous encounters. I think you know exactly what brings me here, Emma. Some very important documents have gone missing, and I have reason to believe you might know something about their whereabouts. Emma forced herself to meet Victor's gaze steadily. I'm afraid I don't know what documents you're referring to. Victor gestured to his men who began spreading out around Emma's property with the systematic approach of people conducting a search. Let me be more specific, Emma. Documents that were taken from a hiding place at the schoolhouse. Documents that contain private business correspondence. Emma felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool mountain air. Mr. Harrington, I haven't been to the schoolhouse recently, and I certainly haven't taken anything that doesn't belong to me. Victor stepped closer to the porch, his presence becoming more threatening with proximity. Emma, you're an intelligent woman, so I'm going to speak plainly. Those documents contain information that could be misinterpreted by people who don't understand the complexities of business in territorial regions. I need them back. Emma understood that Victor was offering her a chance to cooperate before resorting to violence. Even if I knew about such documents, why would you think I have them? Victor's expression grew cold with calculation. Because your friend Miss Davis took them, and your friend Mr. Mitchell has been asking questions about matters that don't concern him. People who involve themselves in other people's private business sometimes find themselves facing unfortunate consequences. The threat was clear and immediate. Emma realized that Victor knew about Helen's discovery and Jack's investigation, which meant their mission to the territorial capital might be compromised as well. Mr. Harrington, Emma said carefully, I think there's been some misunderstanding. I'm just trying to manage my ranch and get through the winter. I have no interest in anyone else's business affairs. Victor laughed, but the sound held no humor. Emma, your husband made the same claims about minding his own business. Right up until the day he started asking questions about cattle brands and making notes about things he should have ignored. Emma felt her control slipping as Victor's casual reference to David's murder confirmed what Dr. Foster had suspected. Are you admitting that you killed my husband? Victor's expression didn't change. I'm saying that people who ask the wrong questions sometimes learn answers they wished they'd never discovered. Your husband was stubborn about things that weren't his concern. Emma's grief and anger merged into a fury that burned away her fear. David was concerned about justice and honesty. He would never have ignored criminal activity just to avoid conflict. Victor nodded as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. Exactly the problem. David couldn't be reasoned with or bought off. He was determined to interfere with legitimate business operations. Emma stared at Victor with new understanding of the depth of his callousness. You killed him because he was honest. Victor shrugged with the casual indifference of a man discussing livestock rather than human life. I eliminated a problem that threatened my business interests. Just as I'm prepared to eliminate other problems if necessary. One of Victor's men returned from searching the barn and approached his boss with obvious disappointment. Nothing in the outbuildings, boss. You want us to search the house? Victor studied Emma's face with the calculation of a predator assessing prey. That won't be necessary just yet. Mrs. Walsh is going to be reasonable about this situation. Emma felt trapped between truth and survival. Admitting knowledge of the documents would confirm Victor's suspicions, but continuing to deny involvement might only delay the inevitable violence. Mr. Harrington, Emma said slowly, suppose someone did have such documents. What would you propose to do about the situation? Victor's smile returned, but it was the expression of a shark sensing blood in the water. I would propose that such a person turn over those documents in exchange for being allowed to live peacefully on their ranch without further interference. Emma understood that Victor was offering her the same deal he'd probably offered David before murdering him. And if someone couldn't produce these documents because they didn't actually have them, Victor's expression hardened, then that person would face the same unfortunate fate as others who've been unable to cooperate with reasonable requests. Emma realized she was hearing Victor's standard procedure for dealing with inconvenient people. Offer a deal that couldn't be accepted, then use the refusal as justification for murder. I need time to consider what you're saying, Emma said, desperately trying to buy time while hoping Jack and Helen were safe and successful in their mission. Victor checked his pocket watch with theatrical precision. Of course, Emma. These are important decisions that shouldn't be rushed. I'll give you until tomorrow evening to locate those documents and bring them to my ranch. After that, I'm afraid the offer expires. As Victor and his men prepared to leave, Emma felt the weight of an impossible choice. She couldn't produce documents she didn't have, but refusing Victor's demands would certainly result in her death. Emma, Victor called as he mounted his horse. I hope you'll make the wise choice. It would be unfortunate if this beautiful ranch needed a new owner. After Victor's departure, Emma found herself alone with the terrible knowledge that she had perhaps 24 hours to live unless Jack and Helen returned with help. She spent the afternoon writing letters to Helen's sister and other friends documenting everything she knew about Victor's criminal organization in case her own testimony wasn't available for the eventual trial. As evening approached, Emma sat on her porch watching the sun set over the valley that had become both her home and her prison. The beauty of the mountain landscape mocked her with its serenity. Nature's indifference to human struggles and fears. The sound of approaching horses made Emma's heart leap with desperate hope. But as the riders emerged from the tree line, she recognized Frank Dalton and two of Victor's men rather than Jack and Helen returning with salvation. Mrs. Walsh, Dalton called as they approached. Mr. Harrington wanted us to check on your well-being and see if you'd had time to reconsider his proposal. Emma stood up slowly, using the porch railing for support as her legs trembled with fear and exhaustion. I told Mr. Harrington I needed until tomorrow evening to consider his offer. Dalton dismounted with casual arrogance. Mr. Harrington is concerned that you might be planning to leave the area before providing a response. He thought it would be better if you had some company tonight to ensure your safety. Emma understood that Victor was ensuring she couldn't escape or seek help before his deadline expired. That's very thoughtful, but I prefer to spend the evening alone. Dalton's smile was predatory. I'm afraid Mr. Harrington insists. He's very concerned about your welfare. Emma realized she was effectively under house arrest until Victor's deadline expired. Very well, but I expect you gentlemen to conduct yourselves appropriately on my property. Dalton gestured toward his companions. Naturally, Mrs. Walsh, we're just here to make sure you're safe and comfortable. Emma retreated into her cabin, understanding that the next 18 hours would determine whether she lived to see Jack again or join David in the cemetery overlooking Copper Valley. The irony wasn't lost on her that she might die on the same property where she'd found hope and partnership after months of grief and isolation. That night, Emma lay in her bed, listening to the quiet conversation of Victor's men as they took turns standing guard outside her cabin. Their presence confirmed that Victor had no intention of allowing her to survive regardless of whether she could produce the documents he demanded. Dawn brought no relief from Emma's desperate situation, but it also brought unexpected hope in the form of distant dust clouds moving toward the valley from the direction of the territorial capital. Emma watched from her bedroom window as the riders approached, her heart racing with the possibility that Jack and Helen were returning with the help that could save her life. The dust clouds resolved into a group of 8 riders moving at the steady pace of people on official business. Emma recognized Jack's tall figure in the lead, but the other riders wore the uniforms and badges of territorial marshals. Helen rode among them, her posture reflecting both exhaustion and triumph. Frank Dalton noticed the approaching riders and shouted to his companions, "Company coming, look like lawmen." Emma felt a surge of hope so powerful it made her dizzy. Jack had succeeded in convincing the territorial authorities to act on the evidence Helen had discovered. "Mrs. Walsh," Dalton called through her cabin door, "you need to come outside and explain to these visitors that you're fine and don't need any assistance." Emma opened her door but remained on the threshold, positioned where the approaching marshals could see her clearly. "Mr. Dalton, I don't think that will be necessary." Jack reached Emma's property first, his eyes immediately assessing the situation and cataloging the positions of Victor's men. Behind him, the territorial marshals spread out with the practiced efficiency of law enforcement officers prepared for resistance. "Emma," Jack called, his voice carrying both relief at seeing her alive and anger at finding her under guard. "Are you hurt?" Emma stepped onto her porch, feeling safety and freedom return with Jack's presence. "I'm fine, Jack. Just entertaining some unwelcome guests." The lead marshal, a weathered man with authority written in every line of his posture, addressed Dalton directly. "I'm Marshal Peterson with the Territorial Court. We have warrants for the arrest of Victor Harrington and several associates for conspiracy, murder, and territorial land fraud." Dalton's hand moved toward his gun before stopping as he realized he was outnumbered and outgunned by federal officers. "You don't have any authority here, Marshal. This is a private matter between Mr. Harrington and Mrs. Walsh." Marshal Peterson dismounted with deliberate calm. "Mr. Dalton, you're named in these warrants as an accessory to murder. I'd advise you to surrender peacefully." Emma watched as the careful structure of Victor's criminal empire began collapsing under the weight of federal authority and documented evidence. The men who had terrorized her for months were suddenly revealed as common criminals facing justice rather than powerful figures beyond accountability. Dalton looked around desperately, perhaps hoping for rescue or escape that wouldn't materialize. "This is all a misunderstanding. We're just business associates of Mr. Harrington." Jack dismounted and approached Emma's porch, his presence providing the protection and partnership she desperately needed during the long night of fear and uncertainty. "Emma," Jack said quietly, "it's over. We have enough evidence to convict Victor and most of his organization. The territorial governor has authorized a full investigation of corruption in this region." Emma felt tears of relief streaming down her face as months of fear and grief finally gave way to hope for justice and peace. "What about Victor?" Helen spoke from her position among the marshals. "Marshal Peterson's men arrested him at his ranch this morning. He's already in custody and being transported to the territorial capital for trial." As Dalton and his companions were placed under arrest and led away, Emma found herself alone with Jack for the first time since his departure. The relief of survival was overwhelming, but it was matched by gratitude for the man who had kept his promise to return and see justice done. "Jack," Emma said softly, "when Victor was here yesterday, he admitted to killing David. He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather. Jack's expression grew grim with controlled anger. Emma, I'm sorry you had to hear that confirmation. But his admission will be part of the evidence that ensures he faces the consequences for all his crimes. Emma stepped closer to Jack, drawn by the steady strength that had anchored her through the most difficult period of her life. What happens now? Jack looked out over the valley that had been the scene of so much corruption and violence, but which could now become the peaceful community it had the potential to be. Now Victor and his organization face trial for their crimes. The territorial government will investigate all the local officials who were compromised by his influence. And this valley gets a chance to become the kind of place where decent people can live without fear. Emma felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she'd carried since David's death. And us? What happens to us? Jack turned to face her fully, his expression reflecting both hope and uncertainty. That depends on what you want, Emma. I've completed my investigation, but I've also found something here that I don't want to leave behind. Emma understood that Jack was offering her a choice about their future together without pressure or assumption. Jack, you promised you'd make me forget my first husband. But what you've actually done is help me honor his memory by seeing that his death wasn't meaningless. Jack reached for Emma's hands, holding them gently while looking into her eyes. Emma, I would never want you to forget David or what he meant to you. I only want to build something new alongside those memories. Emma felt her heart opening to possibilities she'd thought were lost forever. Then let's build something together, Jack. Something that honors the past while embracing the future. As Jack drew Emma into his arms, she realized that her promise to make her forget her first husband had evolved into something much more meaningful. He'd helped her transform grief into purpose, fear into courage, and isolation into partnership. The sun rose over Copper Valley, painting the mountain peaks in gold and rose as the community began its transformation from a place ruled by fear and corruption into the peaceful haven it had always had the potential to become. Emma Walsh stood with Jack Mitchell on her porch, watching the dawn break over their shared future with hope and determination. The valley would remember the dark years of Victor Harrington's influence, but it would also celebrate the courage of those who stood against injustice and the power of truth to overcome even the most entrenched corruption. Emma and Jack had found love in the midst of grief and danger, proving that even in the darkest circumstances, decent people could prevail if they had the courage to stand together. In the distance, the courthouse bell began ringing, calling the community together to begin the work of rebuilding their society on foundations of justice and mutual respect. Emma and Jack walked hand in hand toward the sound, ready to participate in creating the kind of future that David Walsh would have been proud to see realized. The giant cowboy had indeed kept his promise, though not in the way anyone might have expected. Instead of making Emma forget her first husband, he had helped her create a legacy worthy of David's memory and a future bright with possibility for them all. The months that followed Victor Harrington's arrest transformed Copper Valley in ways that surprised even those who had fought hardest for change. Emma stood at her kitchen window on a crisp December morning, watching Jack split firewood with the same methodical precision he brought to every task. The sight of him working in her yard no longer carried the desperate gratitude of someone clinging to unexpected salvation, but rather the comfortable satisfaction of watching a partner in a life they were building together. The trial had concluded 3 weeks earlier with verdicts that sent shockwaves through the territorial government. Victor Harrington received a death sentence for multiple murders, while his organization faced lengthy prison terms for conspiracy, fraud, and corruption. Sheriff Brady had been removed from office and sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. The corrupted local officials who had enabled Victor's crimes found themselves facing federal investigations that would reshape the region's political landscape for years to come. Dr. William Foster had emerged as an unlikely hero during the proceedings, his medical testimony providing crucial evidence that exposed the systematic